Alright, so what we want to do today is we want to talk a little bit about edge flow in 3D modeling. And before we do that, I want to kind of review some of the things that we know. So what we know to begin with is we know how to create objects by using our polygons tab here. I've had some questions about the surfaces tab, but I want to remind you that you want to make sure you're always on the polygons tab, especially for this class. Later we might use some surfaces, but for now we want to stay on polygons. And when we're in the polygons tab, we can always insert new objects just by clicking one of these buttons here, and we can move the object around. It's pretty straightforward, and I feel like we should all be comfortable with that by now. But every object that we have, like say this cube here that I've made and modified a little bit, is made up of faces. We talked about the cube has 6 faces, right? In order to select the faces, we can come up to select face, or we can just hit F11 on our keyboard. And you can see the hotkeys right here, F11 for faces, F10 for edges, F9 for vertices, or F8 for objects. And whichever one I press, so this is F11, F10 I can select the edges, F9 I can select the verts, and F8 I can select the object. If I hit F8 again while I'm selecting the object mode, it'll revert back to whatever mode I was in before. So if I hit F11, I'm in face selection. I hit F8, I go back to object selection. If I hit F8 again, it'll go back to face selection, which is sometimes really confusing. But just know that if you want object selection, just hit F8 again, and it'll come back to the objects. So we learned a little bit about extruding. Right? You can grab a face, you can edit mesh, extrude, and you can modify that face, which is pretty cool. But what we didn't talk about was how to extrude edges. And sometimes you'll have a situation where you might delete that face, right? And now you can come in and you can grab the edges around it, around the hole that you just created, and you can extrude those edges. Right, but you'll notice here when I'm trying to move the edges up, they're kind of going wonky. I really want to move the edges up, but I can't do it. Maya has 2 different types of, I guess, move widgets, and one of them is a local move widget, which is what this one is, and it's usually at some sort of weird angle. And then there's also the global move widget. And if you hit this little power button right here, I like to call it, if you hit that, it'll modify your extrude tool into a global widget. And with the global widget, you can move things up and down in the 3D space, which is pretty helpful. So sometimes just know if you can't get the extrude to work like you want, you need to find this button and click on it, and that'll give you a little bit of a different option. So, but it also works. You can extrude individual I guess individual edges and place them in different places. This is good for making things like handles, or once we get to character modeling, we'll use a lot of extruding faces to make stuff happen. And we'll talk about filling holes in the next video. But for now, what I want to do is I want to talk just a little bit about edge flow. And I want to tell you what edge flow is. So you've probably noticed that you were inserting edge loops, and when you edit mesh and insert edge loop, the edge goes all the way around the object most of the time. That's what edge flow is. All it is it means that you have a face which has 4 sides on it, and every face attached to it also has 4 sides. And as long as that's the case, then when you insert an edge loop, it's going to go all the way around your object, which is usually beneficial, right? So that's good. But sometimes you'll run into an issue, and I have one set up here. If we look at this, we'll see that we have 4 faces. All of them have 4 edges. right? So this face has 1, 2, 3, 4. This face has 1, 2, 3, 4. This face has 4, and this face has 4, but this face here has 5. And for whatever reason, what we've done somehow is created a face with 5 edges. And you'll notice now, if I come up to Edit Mesh and Insert Edge Loop, what's going to happen is my new edge is going to stop when it gets to this 5-edged face, because Maya can't calculate what to do with an edge loop when it runs into a face with more or less than 4 sides. And that's why we always like to model in what are called quads, so that when we insert our edge loop, it goes all the way around our object. So just know that if you've done something like this, you're gonna have to fix it. And a lot of times you just have to delete it and kind of start over. That's probably the most beneficial thing, because you learn more and it's faster. But in the next video, we'll talk about kind of some ways to fix it also. So we've talked a little bit about why edge flow is important, but I also want to talk about kind of poly count, right? And what poly count is just how many polygons are in your object. And what we have here are 4 pretty much basically the same exact object. More or less, they're exactly the same. But if we look at this first one, you see it's got really clean edge flow, right? And it's not too crowded. There's very few edges on this shape, but it looks basically the same as that shape. And when we come in, if we wanted to, we could insert a couple of edge loops. I'm going to insert 2 edge loops here. And here. And now if we wanted to, we could make some sort of door. Using these edge loops, we could just extrude this and pull it back in. And now we've got a little door on our object, right? Which is pretty cool, pretty helpful, and it worked out really quickly. But that was because we didn't have very many edges and we had a good edge flow. If we move to this next one, you'll notice we have a lot more edges, which is fine. We can get to the same thing if we just edit mesh, insert edge loop tool. I'm going to use 1 edge. I'm going to insert these 2, and now I can come in here and I can grab these 2 faces and extrude and just pull them back and create a little door. No, it's getting hard to see, but if I pull back out, then you can see now I have a door on both of these buildings. Now if we go to this building, you'll see it starts off, it has even more edges than this one had to start with, right? And that's okay, because now I've already got these edges in place and I can extrude and pull them back and make the door, right? So a lot of planning needs to happen before you start making your object. You have to determine where you're going to need a door and where you're going to need the edge loops in order to make the door. A lot of students run into a problem like this though, where they have basically the same shape as this first object. If I go back, right, we'll see that these are, this is as far back as I can go, we'll see that these are basically the same 2 shapes, but this one has a lot more edges on it, right? And that's because a lot of students try and insert edge loops to get the shapes they need, when really, in order to make this object, all you need to do is just grab this top face and scale it in with or extrude it in, and then extrude it off the top, right? So it ends up looking like that. A lot of students will try and come in and insert edge loops, until they've created this center piece that they can then scale and extrude out. Now both of those ways work, but the first way that I showed you is a lot more efficient, and you end up with a lot less polygons than you would if you do it the second way. But it depends on where you want your detail. Right, so if I wanted a door here now, I could come in, I could select that, and I can edit mesh and extrude, and I can extrude a door down. And then I can extrude it in. But on this, because I've already got some edge flow, it would be better to insert an edge loop here, and then I can extrude these to make that same door. Right? So really all edge flow does is it allows you to insert detail into your object. Right? If I didn't have quads here, then I wouldn't be able to have inserted that edge loop in order to build this door. And if I didn't have a quad here, then I wouldn't have been able to extrude it down to make it the door. So you just want to make sure that you're always working with quads. Now the last thing I want to show is just kind of some basic stuff about how extrude works with edge flow. And I'm going to delete most of this. I'm going to do a couple of things really quickly. So right now we just have one face here. Obviously it comes with really good edge flow because it's just one face. But if we select the face and extrude it, and we scale it in, then what we do is we create an edge loop. So from this face to this face to this one is called a face loop. But if we insert an edge loop, then it will follow that line. That's all that an edge loop is. It's pretty straightforward, I hope. But the important thing is to keep a consistent edge flow. A lot of times what students will do is they'll say, you know, maybe they want a building on top of this, so they'll come in and they'll grab these edges and they'll extrude them up. Which is fine, but now if I came in to insert an edge loop, I run into a problem where Maya doesn't know what to do with this face because the edge right here has 3 different faces coming off of it before I insert the edge. So you want to make sure that every edge only has 2 faces attached to it. Right, and I can fix that by deleting this middle face, and then if I come in and insert the edge loop again, then Maya knows what to do. Right, so the important things to remember is that every edge needs 2 faces, every face needs 4 edges around it, and then you can insert edge loops and they should have a pretty consistent flow. The last thing I want to talk about is something called overlapping faces. And I think that you guys, some of you had a problem with this when you were making your cities. So I want to show you what an overlapping face is. Sometimes what will happen is a student will select the face and they'll say edit mesh and extrude. And then they'll say, oh no, I didn't want to do that, so they'll click off. Now what they've done is they've created a situation where what was once one face is now 2 faces. So I'll show you that again. So to start with, our plane here is just one face. Right, I can select the face and move it around, and it's just a single face. But if I come in and I select the face and I edit mesh and extrude, and then I select off of the face without undoing the extrude, then what I'm going to do is I'm created something that what was once one face is now 2. And what happens there is we create overlapping faces, and that in turn creates problems for Maya and inserting edge loops, because if there's 2 faces on top of one another, then Maya often can't tell which one you want the edge loop applied to. And then it's going to create problems. So you want to make sure you stay away from that. The best way to do that is to know that whenever you select a face and extrude, if you don't get what you want out of it, you have to hit undo, which is the Z button. You have to hit undo before you selected the face. And then you'll be able to avoid having overlapping faces. I feel like that's all the time I have for today for this presentation. We'll give another one. We'll talk a little bit about how to create and fill holes and merging vertices. And with the knowledge of that, we'll be able to do our next project. Will be a little bit more in depth than the primitive buildings, but it still shouldn't be too hard for you. So we'll talk about that in the next presentation.